Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So social media links, along with email, Substack, will be provided onto audio platforms, Audible, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify for podcasters, just to name a few of the podcasts that I'm on. And I'm looking to branch out to where I'm on all of the podcast platforms. So as I mentioned in the previous podcast in this series, I'm currently running an ad on different podcasts, particularly the podcast of Dateline 2020, Megan Kelly, Tinfoil Hat, Lore. On these podcasts, I am running an ad about the Harboring Light. And for those viewers in Texas, give it a listen and give me some feedback. It would be greatly important. And the best way to contact me is through email. Okay, so this episode is all about the particular singers from Turkey and South Africa. So I decided to do something different than what I was saying in my previous podcast on Wednesday. I thought about it, so I'm going to clue into two particular artists from Turkey that I think hone into the different styles and the aesthetics, and then it gives the ideas and the atmosphere within those ideas about the social aspects of Turkey from my point of view. And then to end out with jazz from South Africa, I'm going to talk about particular albums I think are quintessential to the sound and the also with along the lines of the aesthetic, and it gives you the idea and the substance behind the culture and the nature of these artists, the jazz and the other aspects of South Africa that you wouldn't think about. All right, so here we go. Let's dive in. Okay. Sezen Aksu. When Sezen Aksu rose to prominence, she changed the face of Turkish pop music and began embedding as an enduring figure of Turkish pop culture. Her work with, I believe the pronunciation, Tunik in the 1980s became very influential, and it was with the release of Gülsüm or Smile, I believe the translation for that, in 1991, again collaborating with Tunik, that she hit a commercial and critical zenith. Commercial success, or the zenith of that. Now, Turkish pianist and composer Fahar Atoluk, I believe the pronunciation of that, managed to sum up why she was so important to Turkish music. Along the likes of 50 Voices of the World, along such power global music hitters as Celia Cruz, it states as this: her influence, thusly, Turkish is not a good sounding language. You know, it's not musical like French or English, but with singers like Sezen, for the first time, the Turkish word became much more musical and started saying something really deep. It wasn't simple anymore. With that in mind, it is easy to understand why she became the phenomenon that she did. For example, the title track, which is rather melancholy, which means smile in English, it has bittersweet characters and all of this that are interlaced with sad songs. But, however, there are pure, fun pop songs and upbeat things of this nature as the essence of pop songs that are in this album. So with this variety, it keeps it fresh. Now, nevertheless, Gulsum remains a good album with a very powerful house of a vocalist at the center of it. So, this is a record to check out, I think so, too. And as it's not only hugely influential in the Turkish music scene, it's also an album that is genuine and does have a power to express emotions across language barriers. So when you get into the aspects of language barriers, is already a battle to deal with. And then when you go into it and you understand that, and your vocal styles help to translate and transcend this, it's really impactful and powerful, and it goes to the dedication and the foresight of the musical artists to successfully merge and do this, and it makes what they're saying even more impactful, and that's really just quite a nice touch. All right, so Sem Karaca. So this is the Anatolian rock. In 1968, widespread protests against the military and government were happening all over the world. The protests were triggered by the civil rights movement and the rhetoric against the Vietnam War in the U.S. The wave of counterculture translated into different struggles in each country. People protested against oppressive governments, lack of free speech, and lack of civil freedoms all over the world. In Europe, the movement was mostly run by student unions. The 68 movement showed up in Turkey as an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist student movement. So the Anatolia rock was born out of this counterculture movement against homogeny elements of the society. Music artists started off by copying the English rock music songs and covering of famous songs. English words were getting incorporated into Turkish rock songs by the late 60s. Sem Karaca, who leaned towards political leftism, hence socialism, in the late 60s, argued that rock music should bring forth the stories of the Turkish people rather than recreating Western music. He composed traditional folk poetry in the form of rock music to stay true to the Turkish self. Karaca wrote and sang the Parka, I believe the pronunciation of that, in 76. The song tells the story of a student getting shot in his parka coat during the civil unrest of the 70s. Also known as the communist coat at the time, the green parka became a popular symbol of the Turkish left because of Jigismis was a student leader who spearheaded the anti-imperialist leftist 68 movement in Turkey. Trained in a guerrilla camp in the Jordan by the Palestine Liberation, or the PLO, he committed violent disturbance in the universities against American academic kidnaps, U.S. personal and key propositions. Now, before I wrap this up and go in and talk about the rest of this stuff, I think it's quite interesting. Now, I don't agree with the aspects of socialist, communist ties. Because when you strip things down to the heart of the matter, when you have, as I mentioned in a previous podcast, when you have the idea of, well, go back to doing things as the DEI of today, making things equal for everyone. When you get into that sort of mentality and you have that sort of outlook, you take away and you discriminate against others who don't deserve to be discriminated. And you get into this radical notion that all for one and one for all, and it's really good intentions, but it gets perverted by not having the mentality that sometimes we're not all equal in merit, and that has to be understood. So U.S. personnel and key positions and led to bank robberies in Turkey. On the walls of Turkish courts, as a quote, which translates to "justice is the basis of the state," there's an argument regarding who came up with this phrase. Some historians suggest that it belongs to the Prophet Muhammad and the second of Islam. Some will argue that it belongs to Mustafa Kemal, believe the pronunciation of him, but he in fact is the founder of Turkey. Either way, it is said that when Gimis was on trial, he smiles to himself and the judge asks him, "What are you laughing at?" And he replies by saying this: "It says justice on the wall behind you. I am laughing at that." This phrase has since then become popular in Turkish discourse, and it is used whenever the rule of law is questioned. So, Sim was reading the newspaper. He saw the news of the student shot on the street. So he got emotional over the photo of the young man laying there, lifeless in his parka, and he writes this song. For me, Parker tells the story of a generation of wasted potential, because these educated men ended up shooting each other on the street for what they believed to be the best for their country. I leave it to my readers to decide if ideological fights are actually worth it or not, or if it is even justified to fight for ideology. Simca tells in his song the family in his poverty, so the mother has to mend the parka that his son died in, and so the younger child can use it. The younger child will wear the same coat when he starts university and maybe end up dead just like his brother. The song depicts the vicious cycle Turkish youth themselves find at this time. And that's to close in on this. It's quite impactful to have that insight, to understand that there are things that aren't, in the grand scheme of things, for all intents and purposes, are not worth fighting for. It's easier to step back and do things with the diplomatic and a level head. Now, and I think it's very impactful too that Simca decided to leave this up to the listener about all these things. It's very smart and very impactful. Something to think about. All right, here we go. Let's go on to South African jazz. And so I decided to break things down with these particular albums, and instead of as I mentioned in the intro, instead of doing a whole survey of all these different artists, I think it can impact more and say more by reaching on and pinpointing to these particular albums. All right, so here we go. All right, so Miriam Makeba and the Skylarks. While Miriam Makeba may be best known for her 1960s recording, particularly Pata Pata, these recordings from the 50s rank among the finest in her career. Still a rising star at the time, Makeba had come to prominence by singing with the leading close harmony vocal of the day, the Manhattan Brothers. Gaining enough notoriety in her own, Makeba went to the studios with an all-woman vocal group, a rarity at the time, called the Skylarks. The result stand as some of the finest examples of this style, and the recordings also highlight Makeba, supremely confident and swinging, a master vocalist even at the dawn of her career. All right. And this as its title, Manenberg is where, and the title is Where It's Happening. Although, okay. South Africa for Europe and then America in the 1960s, the Abdullah Ibrahim, formerly the Dollar Brand. At this point of the 70s, during those visits, he would record some of the landmark albums of his career with a host of incredible local talents. No recording, however, stands out more than the Manenberg, offering up 2 long tracks. The title track with The Pilgrim are each about 13 minutes long. The album calls back to an earlier form of South African jazz. With this album, it captures lighting in the bottle, as some people say, and inadvertently creating an unofficial anthem of the youth uprising that would occur just a few years later. The performances on the album are accompanied by Robbie Jenkinson and Morris Goldberg's alto solos still sound fresh 4 decades later, according to the. And I think you should check this album out. And, of course, all the song sources that I'm reading from will be provided for you on Substack. Manenberg. By the way, if this song doesn't ring a bell, you might know it by the American release, Cape Town French. Now, home is where the music is. Grazing in the grass and bringing him back home, Nelson Mandela. Undoubtedly bigger hits for Bra Hughes. But the track on the 72 masterpiece represents some of the greatest playing he would do in his career. Paired with the exceptional compositions and a truly amazing band, fellow South African Pukwani and I believe the pronunciation, bear with me with this, Makahai, alongside with Larry Willis and Eddie Gomez, offers up an album that is simultaneously catchy, groovy, yet heart-wrenching and moving. All right, and I'm going to close with this one. So for many, Winston Manitanku, the 1968 album, is the most influential jazz album in the South African scene, the equivalent to the influence of South Africa's jazz scene, that of John Coltrane, a super supreme head for America, is therefore somewhat shocking, and an album so influential is almost unknown outside of South Africa. Hearing the album, particularly its title track, was a life-changing experience for many. Menentunku's horn, playing intensely lyrical and questioning, stands as the gold standard for South African approach to tenor playing. One heard in the sound of contemporaries like Duke Maskey. So Maskey is the South African artist, as well as seeding generations of artists from McCoy to Linda Sukshanik. All right, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. And also to clue in to the significance and the reason behind the Harboring Light. So, and on this note, and I'm also going to talk about other things. So, think about it like this, and this is my reason behind naming my podcast The Harboring Light. You know how if you're driving in a neighborhood, when you're getting home late, so that if you have that kind of job where you're getting home late like that, or you're on a highway and you notice particular light in the darkness, and it gives you comfort. Think about those things. And that's the whole reason behind this podcast. All right, so on next week, I'm going to end the aspects of talking about global folk music. And then I'm going to lead in, and I'm going to see how this goes too. So on the continuing months for June, July, so what I'm going to do is get into the aspects of urban legend, well, more particularly in July, but I'm going to lead up to these things by talking about different tidbits and things of that nature. And then on Fridays, I am going to go back and talk about music from the different regions, and with the different regions, the different part of the U.S., and then the different parts of the world that my listeners are from, and talk about the music and all of this in the culture. And then I'm going to go more in depth about urban legends, particularly in July. The first part of it, I'm going to talk about the urban legend behind the Tootsie Roll. And that would be the first aspect of that. And then so on. And get into more depth about Americana, because it will lead to the bread and the tapestry along the lines of Independence Day. And I'll just continue that out. And then, as I said on Fridays, I'll go back into the music and the aspect of the culture and all of that, of the different states and in the different parts of the world of the listeners that listen to me. I appreciate all of you, and thank you so much. And feedback is greatly important. And as I mentioned, email is a great way to get an immediate response from me. And Substack too. You want to follow me? You'll write a comment about my particular writings that I have on Substack. It'd be greatly important too. All right, y'all. Take care.